good morning to you, members of the media here in San Fernando. And let me thank you for coming to cover a brief statement as it relates to COVID-19, as it relates to the T&TEC situation and OWTU as the recognized majority union, and our commitment to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago continues to receive a reliable supply of electricity, but at the same time, those who are responsible for providing that reliability of supply ensure that their lives are treated with the utmost priority and that they get the immediate and deserving medical attention that is required for their sustenance, and not just for them, but for their families. First of all, let me thank all of the T&TEC workers throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed all of the workers, the essential services workers throughout the country, media workers also, who put their lives at risk to ensure that the country's economy, the wheels of the economy, continues to turn in a time and a moment of deep crisis. Indeed, Trinidad and Tobago today is not as normal as it was last week or the week before or even yesterday. And as the situation develop and change from time to time, minute by minute, hour by hour, the type of collaboration that is required to treat with this scourge, this life-threatening pandemic, has to be one that is unprecedented and certainly unlike what we were having prior to this situation. What does that mean? It simply means that every single employer, every single businessman, all trade unions, all of us have to come together in unison to be able to fight what has been described as a pandemic situation which would spare none of us, which respect none of us. And therefore you would have seen in the major first world country, namely America, Europe, and the United Kingdom, despite all of the resources at their disposal, the one common thing that they are all saying is for them and the world to win the battle against this dreaded virus, it calls for a collaborative, all hands on deck, united, total approach. And that is where we want to posit our concern this morning. Because insofar as the T&TEC management is concerned, they see this as an opportunity to do those things that they could not have done before. In this moment of crisis, unfortunately in Trinidad and Tobago, some people see many different opportunities. The businessmen see it as an opportunity, the grocers and so on, to raise their prices on items which before you did not pay attention to. So for instance, the issue of hand sanitizers and so on, and other bleaches and other basic items which normally would have gone either unpurchased or not to the level that we are purchasing now, or unattended, or not much attention paid to it at the grocery shelf. Those items, because of their in dire demand now, they saw an opportunity to raise the prices. So some people see an opportunity to make money out of it. Some people see an opportunity to make mischief out of it. And some people see an opportunity to get their agendas forwarded and fast forwarded to the point where they would not have seen that opportunity prior. And so what we see is a dreaded disease, a dreaded virus attacking everybody. And what we also know and see and commit to, that's the OWTU and the trade union movement, but speaking specifically for the OWTU this morning, what we see in this moment of crisis is an opportunity for us to come together. It's an opportunity for us to engage all of the management to ensure that all of their workers whom we represent, they treat them fairly in a most human way, but most of all, they place their safety and the safety of their families at the center of utmost priority. May I also report, before I talk about the T&TEC situation, that we have had cooperation with employers. We have had employers who are well-meaning, who understand the problem, and who respect their workers, and who have decided to sit with the union, the OWTU, of course observing social distance and social protocols and social distancing and so on. But in the framework of taking all of the necessary precautions, those employers are willing to and have demonstrated that they would sit with the OWTU, and those are the employers that would gain enormous benefits, and that their employees and their families will be well protected given that approach. And so the OWTU is encouraging that approach. But as we speak this morning, I want to inform the general public, which general public throughout Trinidad and Tobago are the recipient of the service that these workers at T&TEC provide, that service could well be placed at risk because of the T&TEC's management callous approach to treating with this situation. Because they see an opportunity to implement things they could not have implemented before, to break protocols and to break provisions of collective agreements and so on, but more importantly, carry out a questionable agenda and create a crisis within the crisis. And at the end of it, somebody, and this morning it is not my intention to name who it is, but they are feeding into and working and peddling the agenda of some other entity, that's the top management in T&TEC, that would benefit from a crisis within a crisis. Indeed, Trinidad and Tobago is in a crisis. Indeed, the world is in a crisis. And therefore, the level of response and coordination and collaboration and respect that is required, that is not being demonstrated at the level of T&TEC management. Let me get straight into what is happening. As we speak, the union is with confirmed reports that there are some 35 workers who have been quarantined, all employees of T&TEC. And so 3 at Arima, 7 in Tobago, 20 in Port of Spain, and 5 in South. That's the report as we speak. Now that report contradicts what the T&TEC report would have been, simply because theirs is the attempt to suppress the reality to the public. What that does, it places both the workers and the public at serious risk, life-threatening risk. Further, it is also the report that we are experiencing great difficulty, workers that is at T&TEC are accessing what has been described as pandemic leave. And so workers are told in some areas that you have to exhaust your normal leave, and in other areas they are just outright not being paid. That's the single parent situation, not being paid for accessing that particular leave. What all of those inconsistencies and draconian approach would lead to is a suppression of the information. And therefore what you can very well find is that because the workers are uncertain as to how they can, 1, access the leave, or 2, be paid for it, compensated to treat with their own economic situation, what that would lead to is those workers unfortunately suppressing their feelings and symptoms and so on. And when that occurs, it puts the total T&TEC environment at risk. But guess what? It is not just the T&TEC environment, because the T&TEC environment is not an isolated environment. It is an environment where the workforce, particularly the field workers, interact with the general members of the public at large throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, if you do not have a responsible approach on the part of the management treating with this situation, you could very well find a suppression of the information. We have written to the chairman of T&TEC. We have also requested both verbally and up to as late as yesterday evening, penned a letter, an urgent letter, requesting a meeting with the general manager of T&TEC. And if you think that there's a responsible management and a responsible board of directors at the T&TEC's disposal as we speak, that is not the case, because we are yet to have a proper and a respectful and a response that the situation demands, because we are yet to hear from them as to how the top level executive of the union will sit with the top level management of T&TEC and determine the exact nature of the challenges that we face, because those challenges may range differently from one area to another, but the exact approach that we would take, the collaborative approach that the union is inviting to take at this top level, and have it well communicated across the T&TEC workforce so that the commission can continue to perform its function and at the same time ensure that workers are not placed at risk. That has not happened. Indeed, we are seeing a stout refusal to respond in kind to be able to put that in place. And so we are calling this morning on the Minister of Public Utilities to stand up and take control of your ministry, take control of that entity, T&TEC, to ensure that all board members of the board of directors who today carry different agenda, different political agendas, and all top management who we suspect, is my suspicion, the union's suspicion, that the general manager has an agenda that is opposed to the government's agenda, that which is to seek to ensure that the general population is protected, that his is won by his approach will create a crisis within the crisis. And therefore, the Minister of Public Utilities ought to stand up and take control, instruct the general manager of T&TEC to meet with the union, the recognized majority union, and discuss the nature of the vast nature of the challenges we face and the type of responses that we must put in place to deal with these challenges, because that is not happening. They are provoking a type of response from the union, that which when that comes about, or from the workers, but when that happens, they will fold their arms, reap the deep political dividends of the chaos. Somebody will reap it, and the government's agenda, the government's intention to treat with the situation will not be dealt with. I'm calling on the Prime Minister to ensure that all of your ministers discharge their responsibility effectively and efficiently in a timely manner, to ensure that all of those ministries under their control do what they are charged with the responsibility of doing, because that is not happening in the T&TEC situation. And so workers at T&TEC are now fearful that they will lose pay in accessing pandemic leave situation. Why that should be so? Why should that be the case after you have had a pronouncement coming from guess who? The Minister of Labor. And let me just say in passing that the most incorrect approach was taken on the part of the Minister of Labor on Sunday. She placed the proverbial cart before the horse. And therefore, the discussion that should have taken place at the level of the National Tripartite Advisory Council and T&TEC prior to that announcement did not take place. What should have occurred is that the three entities, business, labor, and government, of which the Ministry of Labor is a great part of the government's representation, should have sat together at the level of T&TEC, discuss the issues, and come up with one common approach and instruct the general population, instruct the business community, instruct the employers to do what is necessary, but do it in unison. That has not happened. What instead happened is the panic button was pushed, in our view, on the part of the minister by coming out in a premature way and putting out guidelines which are meaningless and which some employers are not even taking seriously and others are not even taking on at all. And therefore, it was just a waste of time putting the cart before the horse. And yesterday, the council would have met, and those discussions have not been finalized, and we are yet to hear a united statement coming out of that body. But meanwhile, Trinidad and Tobago is exposed. The world is exposed. The T&TEC workers, the respondent workers, the essential services workers, the media workers, all of you are at the tip of that exposure because of the nature of the job that you perform and where you perform that job. And therefore, we are saying that it calls for close scrutiny, monitoring, respectful collaboration, meaningful, not just spoken, put out a statement by T&TEC, but deep and meaningful consultation and collaboration with, guess who? The recognized majority union that represent all of those workers. Because guess what? We will be able to bring to bear in those discussions issues relative to all of the areas simply because we are in touch with all of those workers in the various areas. We are in touch with the ground. And the management, that high top level management, for whatever reason, we can say for sure they are not in touch with what occurs or what is happening on the ground. As we speak, we are not certain that all of the workers, the T&TEC workers on those crews that go out to interact with the public have been given proper PPEs and so on. Adequate PPEs, the masks, sanitizers, the gloves, and all of those PPEs that are required to protect those workers while at work. And so, what will happen in an instant where an emergency situation, where those workers go to attend to that emergency and someone display, in their view, the workers' view that is, flu-like symptoms, the cough or sneeze? Are they supposed, those workers supposed to abandon that location or continue to attend to the emergency? Those things continue to be unclear. We are told, we are informed that instead of working less hours, which would require less hours of exposure on the job and in those life-threatening environment, the T&TEC management is insisting that they work in some cases 1 and in other cases 2 extra hours. Now, how could that ever be responsible in this particular situation? And let's ask the all-important and burning question. What about the families of those workers to whom they have to go back at the end of every shift? Are those families not also exposed by virtue of the inadequacy of the T&TEC's management approach to this life-threatening situation? And so we are telling Trinidad and Tobago that even the medical response in all our medical institutions, San Fernando, Port of Spain, and even at Cora and Mount Hope and wherever else, both private and government-owned medical institutions, all of those efforts could be seriously undermined when you have a situation, should a situation arise, where the T&TEC worker have to respond to an emergency to provide electricity for those institutions, when the T&TEC workers themselves fear for their lives. And then you see the domino effect. We can cascade into a situation of chaos and confusion. And nobody else but the government, who ought to be held accountable for ensuring the safety and security and the health and the protection of lives of the people, nobody else will be held accountable for that but the government. Not the opposition, not even the T&TEC management, but the government. You see where I'm going? So I'm calling on you, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm calling on you, Mr. Minister of Public Utilities, to take hold and take control of the runaway T&TEC management that is taking advantage of the situation and ensure that, first of all, the concern of the T&TEC workers has been given priority by the T&TEC management dealing and meeting with, as a matter of urgency, with the recognized majority union, the top level executive of the OWTU. And when we meet, we will meet in strict observance of the necessary protocol which demands social distancing and so on. You yourselves, members of the media, would see how we are conducting this media conference this morning is of a major difference, because all our officers, first of all, they are not in great numbers as we normally would have had them prior, and also yourselves, we have separated, we are quite a distance apart, ensuring as far as practicable we are taking the necessary precaution. But those efforts can be thwarted if you have those officers, workers of T&TEC, and T&TEC workers go back to their workplace, and you have a situation where when workers come to work and to clock in, for instance, or to sign in, for instance, workers congregate. Or to leave in the afternoon, workers congregate at the same time. And so you have, when there's workers who end their shifts at 11 or 12 or hours at the night, working extended hours, as I had mentioned earlier. After doing that, they all come together after meeting different members of the public and so on. After having done that without the necessary personal protective equipment and so on. T&TEC is too much of a vital and important entity, provides a critical service. If there was ever a time that Trinidad and Tobago will understand the nature and the critical nature and the importance of this particular service that these workers provide, that time has come. That time is now. But it cannot just be recognizing and paying lip service to that. We have to demonstrate with great responsibility, due care and diligence for the protection of those workers' health and for their safety and for their lives and for the lives of their families and of course the community or those whom they would unfortunately come into contact with. And again, let me end by saying that even the procurement system that is in place at T&TEC, we are not certain this morning for a number of reasons, not the least being that we have not met at this top level. But for all of those reasons above, we are not certain that there's adequate protective gear and equipment and supplies and so on, re-sanitizers, gloves, masks and so on, for those workers who have to interact with the public. What in effect is happening, while we say that the schools are shut down, bars are shut down and so on, you still have T&TEC workers going out. And what level of protection they have, that is what is being brought to question. So they can put, the situation that is, can put both the T&TEC workers at risk and the public at risk, their families at risk and communities at risk. And such is the high level of responsibility of the T&TEC's management and board, that which to date we are not sure that they have recognized the height and the level and the quantum of their responsibility to be discharged in a moment of crisis. Trinidad and Tobago is in a moment of crisis. We join the world, unfortunately, not for any other reason, but for reasons of this moment of crisis. But the response must be that we must have at the base, regardless of what we do, we must have a collaborative approach of everyone. And if we are urging that which we are, urging all our members, all the workers we represent, indeed all the workers that we come into contact with, and everybody over whom we have some level of influence or whom we don't have, but we are urging everybody to cooperate with what the government has put out. The T&TEC management cannot be an exception to that. And insofar as that is concerned, we take great umbrage this morning that all of these requests have been made and it has not been followed through as yet. All of the statements that they would put out from their corporate communication, those are managed statements. Those are statements aimed to suppress the facts. And so as they suppress the facts, and as the workers at T&TEC recognize that they are at great odds with the facts and what is happening at T&TEC, those workers will be in increasing fear and trepidation, and that too will lead to a sense of anxiety and ultimately lead to a type of chaos, that which we are trying to avoid Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, that which we are not sure that the T&TEC management is on the same page. We thank you very much for covering this statement here this morning. Yeah? Are there any questions? Well, one of the things that we know for a fact is that there would be workers who would have other ailments which would require the use of sick leave in any case. And so the issue of telling the workers to access your leave before you access pandemic leave, That is an issue for those workers. Because of the inconsistency and the lack of clarity with respect to all of this application of pandemic leave across T&TEC, some areas are not being paid at all. Some workers are being told that they are not getting paid at all. And those are the type of mixed reports that we are getting coming to the union. Now, how do we mitigate all of that? Is that we sit down or we sit apart and have a collaborative approach, and both union and company, both union and commission, issue a statement, a joint statement as to how do we access going forward pandemic leave, taking into account that when this pandemic subside, and it is our belief that at some point we are not able now to gauge when, but when it do subside, especially given the fact that we are taking this type of approach in a national way, when that happens, we will still be faced with a number of other life-threatening, non-communicable diseases, which would require medical leave of absence from their jobs. And therefore, exhausting it in a type of situation where you have a type of callous management, the nature of T&TEC's management, is a very risky situation. So, if the worker believes that, listen, he will be exhausting the remainder of his or her leave, that which he deals with his chronic concern later on, that worker, you could very well find a situation where that worker will suppress, and I'm not now pointing to anybody, but that the possibility exists that if there exists trepidation around how you access, and if you are paid by the commission, that worker can very well suppress symptoms and so on. And if that happens in just one case, it is one case too many, which places quite a number of persons and their families at risk. So we are saying that let us determine from a very top and senior level, both at the level of the union and at the level of the commission, in discussions, and coming out of those discussions and collaboration, we will then make an announcement to the workers, this is how you access various forms of leave. But even more importantly, that we will be assured, the union that is, that all of the protective gears and equipment and so on, all of the basic items to protect those workers while at work, both the field workers and the workers at the office. Because you cannot protect the workers at the office in one way and then leave exposed the workers in the fields who go out on emergency calls and so on. You cannot leave them exposed, but we will be assured, given those discussions and agreement, that those things are immediately implemented. As we speak this morning, we are not sure as to what is occurring across the board with the management's intention to treat with the situation as a crisis. You cannot have workers work extra hours, putting more stress and physical strain on them, more mental strain on them, and therefore have the great possibility of, through that stress, reducing their resistance, their physical resistance to viruses and so on. Indeed, the advice is to get as much rest as possible, but the opposite is the case in T&TEC. I'm taking advantage of the situation where some workers would unfortunately grab at overtime and so on. This is not a time to take advantage, Mr. Ramsuk and your management. This is a time to sit down and do the responsible thing. But if your agenda, Mr. Ramsuk, is not one of collaboration, but that you know through that lack of collaboration, through that provocation, you will produce an opposite negative impact, and you will cause chaos and confusion in the commission, and you will cause a crisis within the crisis. If that is your objective, without the minister responding to and getting directly involved and instructing now, well, then you would have achieved that objective, and the government's agenda will not be accomplished in that regard. Because let me say again, the T&TEC workers are like blood flowing through the veins of the body, because they go throughout the length and breadth of the country, touching every single area and community as they provide a reliable service to every single person in this country. We want to continue to have that service be provided in a most responsible and reliable way to ensure that the medical institutions are not threatened with lack of electricity supply, all of them, and so that the medical practitioner can do their work in the night and in the day, and can utilize all of the equipment at their disposal, all of which require the usage of electricity. But as we speak, we cannot, as a responsible union, agree with the T&TEC management that a haphazard approach, a one-sided approach, a disrespectful approach, a non-collaborative approach be the order of the day. We cannot agree with them in that manner. Again, let me end and in reiterating the call for the Minister of Public Utilities, the Honorable Minister Lahunt, to instruct the T&TEC management immediately to meet with the OWTU, the recognized majority union, so that we can have implemented our commitment to ensure that the country receives a reliable supply of electricity in a moment of crisis, and also, while we do that, protect the workers who are responsible for that. Well, first of all, I'm already saying that there's a threat to the lives of those who would, yes, but let me chronicle it in a way that you would grasp it in total. We are saying that those who are to provide the electricity for the general public, but in particular the medical institutions, they feel their lives are at serious risk right now because of how the management is treating with their situation. Now, if that continues and they do not meet with the union and we cannot implement across the board and give the type of assurance that which reasonable people would accept that is necessary for those who put their lives at risk to make sure that the country gets electricity, if the management does not meet with us, well then we cannot guarantee anything. And therefore any life-threatening situation, the workers would be free to place their lives and their family's life as priority. Yeah? Yeah? So I don't think that that needs a for instance, because it speaks for itself. I cannot, as me, as a person, as a T&TEC worker, I am telling you, I cannot know that there are persons in a medical institution, which medical institution is dealing with this threat and the issue of COVID-19, but that the T&TEC management did not protect me as a worker, but placed myself at risk by going to attend to an emergency there. I first have to know that I'm well outfitted and well taken care of. Indeed, I might very well place them at risk because I was not treated with before in terms of protection and so on. And as we speak, at this level of the union, we are saying that that has not happened. What in fact has happened and continue to happen is a sort of a top-down approach, a sort of type of coercing the local union leadership, the various branches and so on, like for instance in the San Fernando, in PLD, and of course Port of Spain and Arima and so on, that if you don't do this, you don't do that, this is what will happen, a sort of a threat and so on, instead of meeting with the top level of the union to discuss in a responsible way. We think that we have demonstrated and continue to demonstrate responsibility, and the employers with whom we have already met and begun to put these things in place and they have benefited from it, they can attest to that with the same union. But the T&TEC situation, the T&TEC is a horse of a different color. It has always been a runaway horse, but they see an opportunity to seize now where they can do the biddings of other people of which we question the interest they are serving. We certainly don't believe that it is a Trinidad and Tobago's interest. Yeah? Well, I think that the lack of proper response, if I am the head of the union, or my executive heads the union's representation at T&TEC, and I'm calling on, speaking with you verbally, and calling on you in writing for a meeting, don't you think that in a moment of crisis deserve a response? And if that response don't come, And me as the union, to advise my workers as to listen, we had a meeting, and this is what came out of the meeting, and we have now agreed on a collaborative approach, and we must do A, B, C, D, E. And these are the protocols, these are the equipment and so on, these are the PPE, the hand sanitizers is adequate, the gloves, the masks, all of those things are in place. What do you do when you go to respond to a call from members of the public? If you see somebody displaying some sort of flu-like symptoms and so on, what do you do? How you respond? In the absence of all of that, check the picture I've painted, which is a reality picture. In the absence of all of that, as a worker, what would you do to protect the interests of yourself and your family? Would you go or would you not go? I think the answer ought to be obvious in terms of self-preservation. And I'm saying that the responsible thing to do is for the management to meet with the union. The Minister of Labour said employers in a most almost flippant way, in my view, because she has not in the past or has not now taken control of any situation, not the least this one. She had made a statement to the effect that the employers and the union should meet. No, Madam Minister, not so. You and the Labour and business should sit down, come out with one common position, and then instruct. This is a situation where instructions ought to be given, and where the incompetence of various ministers is going to be shown clear like daylight. So for instance, if the Minister of Public Utilities didn't take control of this situation, well, then he is to be held accountable. And if he relies on the misinformation, or because he does not have the necessary competence to treat with the T&TEC's management, and he relies on them, and we end up in chaos and confusion, him and his government will be held accountable. I'm saying again, the public is placed at risk. The T&TEC workers are placed at risk simply because of the lack of proper approach of the management. And the one thing you want, the one thing you need, apart from everything else, is a joint approach where every hand is actively on deck. Not just on deck, but actively on deck, doing the right things for the right reasons, for the right outcome. Yeah? Well, so yes, it's a mixture of both self-quarantine and quarantine coming from the management.
Why is that? Travel?
Well, it has to do with peculiar situations whom they would have come into contact with, and whom the persons would have come into contact with, that person would have come into contact with. And so we could end up with a panic situation. All of those things will be properly well managed if we take a methodic approach, a step-by-step approach, but a prioritized approach, and a one that treats with people, placing people at the center. Just remember, every time you press your switch, you turn your switch on, home, and you get electricity, or you put on an appliance, because you're at home, now you are asked to stay out of the bars, stay out of the restaurants. The whole place is coming to shut down. And you at home now, as members of the public, you plug in and you put on your switch, you get electricity. Somebody is providing that for you. And who, the persons that are providing that for you, they are themselves outside there, placing themselves at risk. All we ask for, however, is for the management that are responsible for their due diligence, their due care and attention and their life and their safety, is for that management to be responsible, and for that management to meet with the union, the top level of the union, and to treat with all of these issues in a way that we can communicate to our members that they can perform that task in a safe and a life-saving way. And I can't, at this point, I cannot and I would not venture there, except to confirm that there have been some 35, and the number could go up, persons, all employees of T&TEC who are quarantined as we speak. And I'm saying that in light of all of those things, and in light of the things that I have mentioned here this morning, it gives good and great substance and reason why we should meet as a matter of, we should be meeting yesterday. In fact, they should have us meet even before. We have written to and called on the chairman. The chairman, Keith Serju, is not doing a good job, as is the general manager. But there is where? Yeah, well, I'm not too sure whether it's incompetence or it's an agenda. But they ride on the back of the general manager, which general manager I am saying this morning as a person, as the representative of these workers, who has the ultimate responsibility as the President General. I do not trust the agenda of Kevin Ramsuk and his management team. And that in this situation is very, very worrisome, and vexing to say the least. Thank you very much. And we hope that this message will meet the national population with clarity and that they will understand the intention of the union is to ensure that the government's agenda, the government's intention of protecting the population, that it is carried through and that lives are saved. But that cannot happen if you have the type of approach being taken, the likes of which I have described this morning, unfortunately. Thank you very much.